What happens when one of the most controversial figures in the royal family sits down with the View's most outspoken hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle thought she could control the narrative, only to face the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a complete meltdown that had producers scrambling and security on standby. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood privilege meets daytime television reality. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the View set. Dressed in an immaculate cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, she carried herself with that familiar air of calculated confidence that had become her trademark since leaving the royal family. The studio audience applauded politely, but even they seemed to sense something was different about this particular taping. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting in her usual spot at the head of the table, gave Meghan a measured smile as she settled into the guest chair. The other hosts, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah-Griffin, and Sunny Hostin, exchanged glances that suggested they were all thinking the same thing. This was either going to be incredibly boring or absolutely explosive. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar gravitas that had made her a household name for decades. "We're here with Meghan Markle, who's been making headlines again with her latest ventures and, of course, her ongoing commentary about her time in the royal family." Meghan's smile was perfect, not too wide, not too subtle, exactly the kind of media-trained expression that public relations teams spend months perfecting. "Thank you so much for having me, Whoopi. It's wonderful to be here with all of you." But Sarah Haynes wasn't interested in pleasantries. She leaned forward slightly, her journalist instincts clearly engaged. "Meghan, you've been quite vocal about your experiences with the British media and the royal family. But some critics are saying that you continue to profit from that very association while simultaneously criticizing it. How do you respond to charges that you're having it both ways?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for just a moment, Meghan's perfect composure flickered. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before she recovered, but the hosts had caught it. Joy Behar, never one to miss an opportunity, jumped in before Meghan could formulate her response. "I mean, let's be honest here," Joy said, her New York accent cutting through the studio's careful politeness like a knife. "You left the royal family saying you wanted privacy, but then you did the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, Harry's book, your podcast. That's not exactly keeping a low profile, is it?" Meghan's jaw tightened, and her hands clasped together. In her lap, classic defensive body language that the cameras caught perfectly. "I think there's a difference between sharing your truth and seeking publicity for publicity's sake," she said, her voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "When you've been silenced for so long, when lies have been told about you, sometimes you have to speak up." Sunny Hostin, who had been quietly observing the exchange, decided to press further. "But Meghan, you have to understand how this looks to people. You're a millionaire living in a mansion in Montecito. You have lucrative deals with major media companies, and yet you're still positioning yourself as a victim. Don't you think that's a hard sell for people who are dealing with real struggles?" The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras. Meghan's media training was clearly being put to the test as she processed the directness of the question. Her response, when it came, carried a defensive tone that suggested the hosts had struck a nerve. "I think it's interesting that when women speak about their experiences, they're immediately labeled as playing the victim," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "I've never said I was a victim. I've shared my experiences, and if people want to interpret that as victimhood, that says more about them than it does about me." Alyssa Farah-Griffin, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, chose this moment to enter the fray. "But Meghan, you literally said in the Oprah interview that you had suicidal thoughts because of the treatment you received. You talked about feeling trapped, about not getting help when you needed it. Those are very serious allegations, and they paint a picture of someone who was victimized by the institution." Meghan's composure was beginning to crack more visibly now. Her voice took on a sharper edge as she responded. "Those were my genuine feelings, and they were valid. Just because I've been able to build a successful life afterward doesn't invalidate what I went through." Whoopi, sensing the rising tension, tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. Let's talk about your current projects. You have several initiatives focused on women's empowerment and social justice. Tell us about those. But Joy Behar wasn't ready to let the previous topic go. Before we move on, I just want to say something. You know, a lot of us have had difficult in-laws, difficult work situations, but we don't get to go on international television and air our grievances to millions of people. There's something to be said for handling family matters privately. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked dangerously close to anger. Family matters? She repeated, her voice incredulous. Joy, with all due respect, this wasn't just about difficult in-laws. This was about a racist institution that was willing to throw me and my child under the bus to protect other members of the family. The word racist seemed to electrify the studio. The hosts exchanged glances, and even the usually unflappable Whoopi raised an eyebrow. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, clearly ready to challenge that characterization. Meghan, that's a very serious accusation, Sarah said carefully. You've made allegations about conversations regarding your son's skin color, but you've never provided specifics, never named names. Don't you think if you're going to make those kinds of claims, you should be prepared to back them up with details? Meghan's breathing became more visible, her chest rising and falling as she clearly struggled to maintain her composure. I protected people by not naming names. I could have, but I chose not to. I chose to take the high road. Or, Sunny interjected, you made vague allegations that you can't substantiate with specifics because they didn't happen the way you're suggesting they did. The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and Meghan's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her carefully maintained facade began to crumble as she processed what Sunny had just implied, that she might be lying about the racist treatment she claimed to have received. How dare you? Meghan said, her voice now clearly strained with emotion. How dare you suggest that I would lie about something like that? Do you have any idea what it's like to be the only person of color in that family, in that institution? But the hosts weren't backing down. Joy Behar, never one to retreat from a confrontation, pressed forward. We're not saying you're lying, Meghan. We're saying that making serious accusations without providing evidence puts people in an impossible position. They can't defend themselves against vague allegations. They didn't defend me when I needed it, Meghan shot back, her voice rising. Where was their concern for evidence when the British tabloids were printing lies about me every single day? The conversation was spiraling into territory that even the experienced hosts of The View rarely ventured into. And you could feel the tension building to a breaking point that would soon explode into something none of them were prepared for. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory, attempted to assert control over her own show. Okay, let's take a step back here, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had moderated countless heated discussions. I think we need to, but Meghan cut her off mid-sentence, something that simply doesn't happen on The View. No, Whoopi, I'm not going to take a step back. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, and instead I'm being attacked and having my experiences questioned by people who have no idea what I went through. The studio audience shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the polite, media-trained Meghan they had expected. This was someone whose carefully constructed public persona was cracking under pressure, revealing something rawer and more volatile underneath. Alyssa Farah Griffin, perhaps sensing an opportunity to capitalize on the moment, leaned forward with a question that would prove to be gasoline on an already burning fire. Meghan, you say you came here in good faith, but isn't it true that you've been shopping around interviews to promote your latest projects? This isn't really about sharing your truth. It's about marketing, isn't it? Meghan's reaction was immediate and fierce. Her hands, which had been clasped tightly in her lap, came up in a gesture that was part defensive, part accusatory. That is absolutely not true, and I resent the implication that everything I do is calculated for publicity. Some of us actually care about making a difference in the world, not just sitting around a table gossiping about people. The insult landed like a slap across the faces of the hosts. Joy Behar's eyes widened in disbelief. Excuse me? Did you just call what we do gossip? We discuss important political and social issues every single day. We've been doing this for decades. And yet here you are, spending your time trying to tear down a woman who's actually trying to do something meaningful with her platform," Meghan shot back, her voice now completely stripped of its earlier polish. "Instead of focusing on real issues, you're more interested in palace intrigue and tabloid drama." Sarah Haynes, who had been relatively measured in her previous questions, was clearly offended by the characterization. "That's incredibly dismissive, Meghan. We've covered everything from voting rights to climate change to women's reproductive freedom. But when someone comes on our show and makes serious allegations without backing them up, we have a responsibility to ask follow-up questions." Follow-up questions? Meghan's voice rose to a level that had the sound engineers scrambling to adjust their levels. "You've been grilling me like I'm some kind of criminal instead of someone who survived a racist institution and lived to tell about it." Sunny Hostin, who had been building up to this moment, finally unleashed what would become the most explosive exchange of the entire confrontation. "Meghan, you keep using the word survived like you were in some kind of life-threatening situation. But the reality is, you married into one of the most privileged families in the world, lived in palaces, had access to the finest of everything, and when it got difficult, you had the luxury of walking away to a mansion in California. That's not survival. That's privilege." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face flushed with a combination of anger and humiliation that was impossible to miss. "Privilege," she repeated, her voice shaking with emotion. "You think having your mental health destroyed, having lies printed about you every day, having your own family turn against you is privilege? You think being driven to thoughts of suicide is privilege?" "No," Sunny responded firmly, "but having the resources to leave, having multi-million-dollar deals waiting for you, having a platform to tell your story to the world, that's privilege. Most people who face discrimination and mental health challenges don't have those options." Meghan's composure completely shattered at this point. She stood up from her chair, her hands trembling with rage. "How dare you minimize what I went through? How dare you sit there in your comfortable studio and judge experiences you know nothing about? I was literally trapped in a system that was designed to break me." Joy Behar, never one to back down from a fight, responded with the kind of New York directness that had made her famous. "Trapped? You were trapped? You had choices that most people can only dream of. You could have walked away quietly. You could have worked within the system. Instead, you chose to burn bridges and then profit from the ashes." Profit from the ashes. Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. "I shared my story because I thought it might help other women who are going through similar experiences. But clearly, I was wrong to expect any kind of understanding or support from people who are more interested in protecting the status quo than standing up for what's right." Whoopi, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, finally stood up herself. "Meghan, I think we need to take a commercial break. This conversation has gotten way too heated, and I don't think it's productive for anyone involved." But Meghan wasn't interested in de-escalation. She was beyond the point of media training and public relations management. "No, Whoopi, I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by a group of women who have never walked in my shoes. You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about the privilege of sitting in judgment of someone else's pain from the comfort of your studio chairs." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing something that felt more like a therapy session gone wrong than a daytime television interview. The hosts themselves seemed stunned by the turn the conversation had taken. Sarah Haynes made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Meghan, I don't think anyone here is trying to minimize your experiences. We're just trying to understand how you reconcile some of the contradictions in your public statements." "Contradictions?" Meghan's voice was now barely controlled hysteria. "The only contradiction I see is a group of women who claim to support other women but spend their time tearing them down the moment they step out of line. You want to know what's really contradictory? Claiming to care about social justice while attacking someone who's actually trying to make a difference." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and the hosts finally seemed to realize that they had pushed their guest beyond the point of rational discourse. But rather than backing down, Joy Behar decided to double down on her position. "Making a difference?" Joy's voice was incredulous. "What difference are you making exactly? Besides making millions of dollars off your royal connections while complaining about how awful it was to be royal? Besides dividing families and creating international incidents? What positive change has come from any of this?" That question would prove to be the final straw, the moment when whatever remained of Meghan's composure completely evaporated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would make television history and leave everyone in the studio questioning whether they had gone too far. Meghan's face transformed into something the hosts had never seen before: raw, unfiltered rage mixed with what looked like genuine hurt. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely recognizable as the polished Duchess who had walked onto the set just 30 minutes earlier. "What positive change?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the studio with such force that several audience members visibly flinched. "I'll tell you what positive change, Joy. I've shown the world what that institution really is. I've exposed their racism, their cruelty, their willingness to destroy anyone who doesn't fit their narrow little mold." The host sat in stunned silence as Meghan continued her tirade, her hands gesturing wildly as years of suppressed anger poured out. "You want to know what difference I've made? I've given a voice to every woman who's ever been gaslit by powerful institutions. I've shown every person of color that they don't have to accept racist treatment just because it comes from people in fancy clothes." Sunny Hostin, perhaps realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of control, tried to interject. "Meghan, I think we should—" "No." Meghan cut her off with such vehemence that Sunny actually recoiled. "I'm not done. You sit there in your ivory tower, judging me, questioning my motives, acting like you're somehow morally superior. But where were you when I needed support? Where were any of you when I was being destroyed by the British press?" Joy Behar, never. One to be intimidated, fired back with equal intensity. "We weren't there because we didn't know you existed until you started making headlines by attacking your husband's family. And frankly, after this performance, I'm starting to understand why they might have had issues with you." The studio fell, so silent you could hear the cameras whirring. Joy's words had crossed a line that even she seemed to immediately regret, but it was too late. Meghan's reaction was explosive and immediate. "There it is," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Joy. "There's the real truth. You don't care about racism or institutional abuse or mental health. You care about protecting the precious royal family and their reputation. You're just another group of establishment lackeys who can't stand to see someone actually fight back." Whoopi Goldberg, who had been trying to maintain some semblance of control over her own show, finally reached her breaking point. "That's enough, Meghan. I've been doing this for decades, and I have never seen a guest come on this show and attack the host the way you're doing right now. Attack the hosts." Meghan's voice reached a pitch that was almost inhuman. "I'm defending myself against a coordinated attack by people who invited me here under false pretenses. You didn't want to have a conversation. You wanted to ambush me, to tear me down for your own entertainment." Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been relatively quiet during the explosion, made the mistake of trying to reason with someone who was clearly beyond rational discourse. "Meghan, nobody ambushed you. We asked legitimate questions about public statements you've made. That's what journalists do." "Journalists." Meghan laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound that contained no humor whatsoever. "You're not journalists. You're vultures feeding off other people's pain. You're everything that's wrong with the media landscape today. Sensationalism disguised as serious discourse." Sarah Haynes, who had been watching the meltdown with a mixture of fascination and horror, finally found her voice. "Meghan, you need to calm down. This is getting out of hand." "Calm down." Meghan's voice cracked with hysteria. "You spend 30 minutes questioning my integrity, my motives, my mental health, and then you tell me to calm down? You want me to be the perfect, polite victim who takes your abuse with a smile?" The audience was now completely captivated by the spectacle unfolding before them. This wasn't just a celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a complete psychological breakdown happening in real time on national television. Joy Behar, perhaps sensing that the situation needed to be brought to a conclusion, delivered what would be the final blow. "Meghan, I think you've proven our point better than we ever could. This is exactly the kind of behavior that probably made your time in the royal family so difficult. You can't handle criticism, you can't engage in civil discourse, and you turn every disagreement into a personal attack." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. For a moment, she stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't process what had just been said to her on national television. Then something inside her seemed to snap completely. "How dare you? she whispered, her voice now deadly quiet in a way that was somehow more terrifying than her screaming had been. How dare you analyze my psychology, my behavior, my marriage on national television? You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know anything about the real world outside this studio. She began backing away from the table, her hands shaking as she reached for her purse. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me to the brink. You invite someone on your show, pretend to be friendly, and then attack them when they're vulnerable. Whoopi made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Meghan, nobody's attacking you. We're having a discussion. A discussion? Meghan's voice was now pure venom. This isn't a discussion. This is a public execution. This is what passes for women supporting women in your world. Well, congratulations, ladies. You've gotten your ratings. You've gotten your viral moment. I hope it was worth it. She turned to walk away, but then spun back around for one final parting shot that would be replayed on social media for weeks to come. You know what the real tragedy is? I actually thought you might be different. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could have an honest conversation with other women about the challenges of being in the public eye. But you're just like all the rest, more interested in tearing down other women than building them up. Sunny Hostin, who had been relatively quiet during the final explosion, couldn't resist getting in the last word. Meghan, if this is how you handle criticism, maybe the problem isn't with everyone else. That was it. The final straw. Meghan's composure didn't just crack, it shattered completely. You know what, Sunny? You're absolutely right. The problem is with me. The problem is that I actually believe that women like you might have an ounce of empathy or understanding. The problem is that I thought I could trust you to treat me with basic human decency. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the exit. But she wasn't done. As she reached the edge of the set, she turned back one more time, her voice carrying across the stunned studio. This conversation is over. I'm done being your entertainment. I'm done being your punching bag. And I'm done pretending that this toxic culture of tearing down successful women is somehow acceptable. With that, she stormed off the set, leaving the hosts sitting in stunned silence in an audience that couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling as Whoopi attempted to regain control of the show, but the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had turned into a complete disaster, with Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public image crumbling in real time. The producers frantically signaled for a commercial break as the hosts tried to process what had just happened. In less than an hour, what should have been a standard celebrity interview had devolved into the most explosive confrontation in The View's history, leaving everyone involved to wonder if they had witnessed the end of Meghan Markle's media rehabilitation tour or just the beginning of an even more dramatic chapter in her ongoing war with the establishment.